Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cause and Effect, a show about Betes. This is the second part of the third episode of the fourth season. And if you have missed the first part, I suggest that you check it out. But if you're only here for the draft tips, then they're coming later on in this part, so you can just skip ahead about 20 minutes and then we will talk about the draft. But you should stick around if you're not interested in draft, but interested in the unnamed. About that. These first 20 minutes.
I just realized we should have had a recording of Randy screaming the unnamed here.
The unnamed!
Okay, good enough.
When he puts up the unnamed, which is awesome.
Yes.
And it's internally.
Should we go on?
Yes. The unnamed is also a minion which can use with the Flurry of Action card, which is the premises of our show today. So let's talk about that. And I will shut up for a minute. Isaac, can you speak?
Yes, I can speak. So we're looking at, or should I talk about unnamed or the deck?
The unnamed first, maybe.
Okay, we start off with unnamed. So he's a 10-cap bally, gains pool if he bleeds, and can strike for aggravate damage. Awesome specials. The one problem with him, though, is that he doesn't have any vote, he doesn't have any plus bleed, and his discipline spread is cool, but kind of awkward. So,
and it's also in group 6.
Yes, which is very awkward. Hopefully the weekend will solve that issue soon enough. But let's just slow down here, or rather, I slow down a bit. So, when you see him, you know that you need to do something with him, and it probably involves you rushing, or maybe bleeding. So somewhere along those lines. So, his out-of-clan disciplines are protein and celerity, which isn't overly exciting disciplines. You want to do multi-act with him in order to get out enough of him, because that's the logic behind the Infernals. Either you need to bleed for one action each turn and bleed for shitloads, or you need to get some multi-act to get things going.
Yeah.
We can talk about the unnamed forever. I think we should go down to specifics, really. Say this deck we have prepared.
Yeah. One solution to the unnamed problem or dilemma is of course Flurry of Action.
Yes.
And this is a perfect example, or an example anyway, of how to deal.
I'll bring up the right deck.
So we're looking at, or any moment now should be looking at
It's up to him.
Thomas Nyberg.
Thomas
Nyberg's. I pronounce this in Swedish. Thomas Nyberg's deck. Basically revolves around the unnamed and Santaleus. So the basic idea is to bleed with Flurry Action. Both of these guys have superior celerity. You use Santaleus to cancel some V-lanes and whatnot, and you have Santaleus also for bouncing, and then you have various plus bleed retainers to kit up unnamed, and possibly Santaleus as well. So you do bleed Flurry Action, and after that you go get some enhancing action, retainer for plus bleed or something like that. Then you have Enkel Cog for unnamed, which makes sense. It's a 10 cap, you have Flurry Action, you get that second action if you have Enkel Cog. Then you gain a lot of pool, because you gain 2 pool each time unnamed bleeds. So then you end up on paying the Infernal cost, that's 1 pool, and then you gain 4 pool at a maximum, so that's a net gain of 3 pool per turn, just for bleeding, which is very sweet.
And it's also an actionless, or well, kind of actionless plus bleed permanent, which is extremely good, obviously.
Yeah. That is. So that's basically how this deck has worked, seen the synergy that exists between the unnamed and Santaleos.
Yeah.
And using Enkel Cog, which really makes sense with Flurry of Action. That's the one thing these two decks have in common. It's Enkel Cog reliant and using Flurry of Action.
Yeah. But how important is the multi-act phases in this deck? I mean, compared to the other deck where their political actions are really strong, this doesn't seem to be quite the case in this deck.
I agree, yeah. And I think that might be, if this deck is worse, then that's the reason. Because getting, like, sure, it's nice to get +1 bleed, but still the action, Tasha Morgan, +1 bleed permanently, it's not actually that strong. So, until you get Enkel Cog out, or if you have to contest Enkel Cog, you don't actually have that powerful of actions to take. So, even though it's neat, unnamed with Flurry of Action, they kind of work well together, it's really expensive as well.
Yeah.
Like you use the 10 cap just for bleeding. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of actions until you actually reach the level of bleeds that you could do with... If there's a 10 cap with +1 bleed and dominate, you can very easily start bleeding for 7. It takes a lot of permanent bleed actions to get to bleed for 7 with unnamed. So yeah, until you get Enkel Cog, it's actually not that efficient with Flurry of Action, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, you could... I don't see any rushers or something like that, so it's not really utilizing the other part of the name's abilities.
Well, something that I've seen that's not totally uncommon is to see the unnamed special, the aggravated damage as combat defense rather than offense.
Okay.
Now other people will be like, what's the name?
Less likely.
Yes, there's an eloquent word as well. I'm gonna skip that. Less likely to go into combat with unnamed because they don't want to go to torpor.
Was the word less prone?
It works like a deterrent, basically, for potential blockers.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get these, like, random block. I'll just block for the hell of it. The one who blocks you really has a plan to deal with those 2 aggravated damages.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then it's gonna be easier to bleed the next time. Well, what I like about this deck is the fact that, as Isaac said about the discipline spread, it's kind of weird discipline spread, but something that really stands out is the lack of defense. It doesn't have bounce on a discipline spread, so this deck includes Auspec's sidekicks, and that's kind of neat. I think it helps a lot. And this deck is more defensive than the one we looked at before, the Inner Circle deck. The Inner Circle deck only had 5 bounces. This one has more bounces and actually has reduce as well. So...
And you have the gain pool for unnamed doing his stuff thing.
Yeah, so it actually has like defensive qualities. Even if they're not overwhelming, it's more than just standard dominate gives you.
Yeah. So, quickly, step by step, Isaac, how would you play it?
Depending a bit on where I end up and how many transfer I have, but I guess most of the cases I'd go unnamed first, then Santaleos. But it depends on the situation. If you desperately need to bounce or some such, it's better to go Santaleos first, depending on what your predator is. And then you just start bleeding from turn 1 and don't do any shenanigans. You need to keep constant pressure to be able to keep up.
Yeah.
Like bleed, and that's really what you need to do. Because, okay, Santaleos gets plus bleed if Asylum Hunting Grounds hits the table once in a blue moon, and I don't even know if it's good. So basically they have no plus bleed. And until you start getting the retainers Enkel Cog on the table. Yep. So just get them out and start bleeding straight away. No shenanigans, no waiting around, no doing tabled actions, just bleed.
I actually realized something. That's probably a good way to play this deck. since Flurry of Action is kind of bad until you draw Ankle Cog, you can play Flurry of Action on inferior until you draw Ankle Cog.
Yeah.
Which is not that bad.
Yeah, it's always the action, the choice of making it on inferior, of course.
Yeah.
Which
What
we
is extra
discussed
good
earlier.
in this case, since you actually don't have much useful things to do anyway.
Take like transferring out a 10 cap and start bleeding for 1 with that 10 cap is probably the definition of bad play.
Especially if you have 15 reaction cards total.
Yeah.
There's not much.
So you desperately need the kitting up stuff, Ankle Cog especially, but also I guess that you need to go get some retainers and start making use of the vampire. Or like bleeding for 2 times per turn, or 2 times each laps around the table is decent, not overly strong.
Adam, do you have anything to say about Santalonius before we leave this deck alone?
Yeah, sure. He, as a vampire, is actually kind of powerful. And something that, if you read the card texts, really, you can see that it doesn't say no cost is paid after the cancel. So if you manage to get him out in time to cancel Asila's Valley from your prey, that Asila's Valley will cost your prey 5 pool with no effect.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and also this goes for other... it's quite common that people play Pentix, for instance. That's 2 pool down the drain.
Yeah.
So that on its own is kind of powerful, but also the actual cancel a master card being available at any time of the game is very powerful as well. People will be like, okay, I'm not going to be able to play Pentex on this deck. They're going to think like that. They're going to be like, no, it's not worth it, because they're just going to cancel it. So instead of even trying to play a Pentex, they're going to keep it on hand or play it on someone else.
How should you manage if Santalonius is on the table, Isaac?
Making go down to less than 3 blood as fast as possible, so you can start playing your master as you want them to play.
Yeah.
So
Play. Go ahead.
Play good masters, but not like the 5 pool masters, and try to get the Santalonius player to get overconfident with cancelling.
Yeah. I will always remind that if they're not always remind. Yeah, you could cancel this. You could cancel this. And
Yeah. Be the good guy. Just I'm playing this. Do you want to cancel? I'm playing this. Do you want...
Villain always. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to cancel my Villain for everything? Do you want to cancel my Villain?
Yeah.
Villain is.
Yeah. Stuff like that.
And also realize when it's not going to be worth it for the Santalonius player to use his special.
Yeah.
Because at some point you might think, okay, I really need this card, and it's good for me. But you won't play it because you're afraid of Santalonius. But there actually might be a situation where the Santalonius player can't afford to cancel it.
Yeah.
So they're not going to do it anyway. So you need to mentalize that player's state of mind.
Yeah.
Well, that's obvious. You need to do that all the time if you this. So
It's
that's a good point. But
if you're the one playing with Santalonius, it's hard actually.
Yeah.
I think.
It's really an investment. You can do it twice each game. More or
Yeah.
less.
So don't throw it away foolhardily. That's all I wanted to say about that. Any more conclusions about this deck? I think it's a good way to utilize Flurry of Action, of course. Right. Any other thoughts?
I just put it out there. I was talking to Johannes Walch on last EC, and he mentioned that you can play with dual form with unnamed, which is really cool. But then you can start doing more or less basically the same stuff with celerity.
Yeah.
It's get really sweet. Because you don't waste that much blood, blah blah blah. Anyways, just wanted to put it out there. Use your dual forms with unnamed. It's cool.
This deck didn't play with homunculi. Yeah?
Yeah, that's actually... it's a good addition. It's not like strictly needed, because as we said, the multi-act is not that useful in this deck, but homunculus is a useful addition, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's fun.
If you want to play with unnamed, I say I say that you need more than 2 anchor cogs. You probably want to go with 82 cards, probably as high as 4 anchor cogs, because it gets so important for this deck actually to do anything useful.
Okay.
I
Well.
agree. Maybe even more than 4, maybe 5.
Yeah.
A lot of people have 5 Anchor Cog for the unnamed deck.
It's one of those bragging decks.
Yes.
Not a word to make it.
Yeah. I just made like a $2,000 recommendation.
Okay, so enough about the unnamed, and let's talk a little bit about more the card. Just Flurry of Actions. Do we have any other cards that any parables to it?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier when I talked about which deck I've been playing, and it's Cavalier. It's, well, not very similar, but there are some tangents. Can't bring it up. But it gives multi-acts to some vampires that you don't normally have the option to multi-act with.
Okay.
So, and it's like permanent multi-act as well. So it's efficient to add. It's worth the master slot if you can multi-act twice or 3 times in a game. It's really expensive blood-wise, so you need like some kind of solution for the blood. But other than that, I feel like this can only diversify deck building in Betas overall. A lot of really popular cards and crypts already use cards that cost a blood. Govern on the Line, maybe prominent example.
Comes to mind, yeah.
So then you can make a Govern on, like a Dominate multi-act deck with Cavalier without too much interference.
Yeah, it's a really game changer, Cavalier, and I haven't seen that much in play. I mean, I've seen it some over the last year maybe, but before that, like, not so much.
I think one issue with the card is like the physical world. It was a rare card from Heirs to Blood. Heirs to Blood was a really small printing, as far as I understand it. So it's not a lot of people that have this card, and you need a lot of them, I think, to make it usable. At least 4, maybe 5 in some decks. So I think that's an issue. But it's a really great card. If you ever wanted your AAA to begin to multi-act, this card is insane with AAA.
Yeah.
Well, the same goes for a lot of like the common standard crypts. Isaac has had the Malkavian 94. We've seen. Well, I talked about my Malkavian Lutz deck, and we've seen the La Sombra deck as well with it. Like just standard crypts that don't normally have multi-act get multi-act from this card.
Yeah.
But this isn't an action card that makes you untap. This is more like a monster card. Like Danse Macabre is probably the closest parable to this card. What do you think about Danse Macabre, Isaac?
I think it's weak. But
it's weak.
Yeah, but I think it's better than one thinks initially. I think you can find 1 or 2 decks where you might fit 1 or 2 copies of this, and it will pay off. But the biggest issue is obviously it's an entire master phase action to do, possibly get to burn a blood to untap once. Like, it's very circumstantial, but I think Danse Macabre is worth trying out. It might end up being a really nice addition. That card should really have been trifold.
Well, one interesting comparison with Danse Macabre is for Misdirection, in my opinion. Since in a lot of cases, 1 more action for you is like 1 less block for your prey when you try to oust him. With Danse Macabre, you get 1 more action, you get some extra chance of ousting. Misdirection is the same thing, just that you remove 1 block from or 1 bounce from your prey. So they kind of have there's a comparison there.
Yeah. And the new set is going to be called something like this, maybe.
Danse Macabre.
Yeah.
Exactly like this.
Well,
thank you. Some other cards that I think you can make some comparisons with Flurry Actions are the like tool up, kit up cards that makes you untap, like Wellmark, Shreknet, No Secrets from Magai.
Yeah, I think that's a better parable, because that's an action that actually makes you untap. So it's,
I don't agree that it's better, because all of these are kit up cards that you can only have one of on yourself.
yeah.
And so this is more or less like getting an equipment, and then on top after you get that equipment, more or less.
It's kind of
See,
like
that's tears.
it's kind of like how Enkel Cog is an action modifier. You get it as part of an action,
Yeah.
but it doesn't cost that action. So I think it's just like it's not a primary strategy. It's not a victory condition to play these tool-up cards. Like well-marked is just nice to get, but it's like in addition to the rest of your strategy.
Yeah.
Flurry of Action, for instance, it's actually your strategy. Bleeding is your strategy. You're gonna want to bleed anyway, and then you get to do something else in addition to bleeding.
Okay.
So it's kind of, they have the reverse relationship, but
What
they're absolutely comparable.
What about that vote card that makes you untap?
Scourge.
Or are you talking about My Kin Against the World?
My King Against the World. That's an action. That's a strategy. More.
Yeah, My Kin Against the World in theory is a strategy. In practice, you just get delaying tactics, and then you discard this, and then you continue parity shifting. I've never seen My Kin Against the World be that strong as you can read it. When you read the card text of the card, you're like, shit mama, this is bananas.
Shit, mama, this is bananas.
That's your reaction?
Really?
That's what you thought?
I elected not to curse. I think I should get kudos for that.
Okay.
I'm going through with this train of thought, but in practice you just end up not getting in a situation, because this should be, you should use 2 or 3 vampires, then the 4th or 3rd vampire should do My Kin Against the World with, for X's 2-3, and then successfully do this vote and then untap. It's really awkward. But if someone have a cool deck list that actually works, like I think a lot of decks can include one copy of this and benefit, but like having this as a multi-act engine, My Kin Against the World, I've never seen that succeed.
That would be because it requires a lot better card flow than is like possible. Well, maybe it is possible, but no one has found out the way yet. Maybe.
I haven't succeeded anyways. Succeeded.
Okay. Any more parables or comparisons or ideas or something?
I'm just gonna throw something out there. One idea I had with the card I brought up, Scourge.
Yeah.
You can use Scourge as a blood gain engine. Say if you want to just make a power bleed, but you include Scourge and Vote Captivation for extra blood. Just like an idea I had. It's really stupid, but if someone would like to experiment with it, they're free to do so, and please tell me how it went. Because
please email Adam Espersson, he really needs to know.
I don't know.
So your idea is basically call Scourge to get to use Vote Cap, and then just whatever, I don't care.
Well, it's like a deck with 10 mind rapes and 6 conditionings, and then, well, you know,
I follow like what you do with a lot of blood. It's not, that's not the issue.
Yeah, but yeah, the Scourge is just a blood gain action, more powerful than a Vector if you're playing with enough votes.
It's really sweet that it doesn't say a vampire can only have 1 Scourge.
Yeah, it's kind of
key
required, I think. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
It is interesting. But
Okay.
also kind of stupid.
Another thing that's really interesting is drafts. And I told you guys to make a list of some tips for the draft. A draft tips list. Yeah. Anyways, everybody knows what draft is, and it's good fun, but it's also very hard. So now we will give you tips to make you better at draft. Hopefully. I am not very... Adam.
Okay, should I start with the tips?
Yes!
Okay,
do
I'll
it.
bring them up. Okay, and we had the task of listing 3 of them. My 3 are stealth and wakes for the first one. Like how I think you should pick stealth and wakes. That's like the most strong cards. And I see Isaac has picked something like this, but you also you're kind of
What you do? What's your first tip there, Isaac?
So should I drop my first tip? My first tip is research the set that you're going to draft.
Okay, let's. Yeah. So explain.
Yeah. So if the organizer hasn't released what you're going to draft, email organizer and tell him what you're going to draft, and insist that you need to know. And do the research. Check the card list. Know the rarities of every card. Know what vampires are in. Know the draft set. The draft effects of if draft effects exist in the set you're going to draft, and what they are, etc. Basically, know all 300 or 400 cards by heart.
Okay.
Because
Adam, do you do this?
well, to an extent, I've learned them because I've drafted the series so much.
Okay.
It's not like I haven't pulled out the deck lists and sit down with them and study them, but I do know them and it's really useful. So what Isaac is saying is, if you don't have that knowledge from other previous drafts, you're gonna benefit a lot from doing it if you have the time and energy.
Yeah.
So I did this. I did this once when I were going to the first Keepers of Tradition draft I went to in Germany. The set were just released, so I just got the boxes at my home. I opened up, did the research, and checked the rarities online as well, and try to get a picture of what can be built with this set, what cannot be built, and what archetypes will be more powerful than others.
Okay. And then try to apply that knowledge in the reality of what you draw in the draft.
Yeah, or at least know that, I'm not able to build a swarm bleed because there are very few cards for that, or I'm not going to be able to build a fat guy block deck because there are too few wakes and intercept cards. Stuff like that. Just know what you should not go into when you start picking your cards, because that's more or less impossible to play.
Okay. So sorry I cut you off before, Adam, but you said stealth and wakes. Do you have any? I thought that was pretty straightforward, but maybe you would like to explain a little bit more about it.
Well, the common denominator between that is that to be able to oust in drafts, you need to be really action efficient, and the best way to be action efficient is to get your actions through, which requires stealth, or to actually even have the possibility to take your actions. You need to stay alive, so if you have wakes, you can tap out more. If you don't have wakes, you're not going to be able to tap out as much. So stealth and wakes gives you a lot more freedom to take actions, which is how you win, I think, most of the time with a draft.
So do you when you have I have the choice of taking this card, this is really strong ousting card, or just one other stealth card? Do you usually take one other stealth card, or do you go for the plus bleed card, or so?
It depends, of course, on what I've drafted before that. If I already drafted a few stealth cards, I'm gonna take the bleed card, and so I want the balance, of course. But if it's the first booster and the first card I pick, it's gonna be a stealth rather than a bleed card, I think.
Okay. That's good to know. Should we go on with the list? Isaac, you had kind of the pick stealth, bleed, and block, even if it's not playable with your clan.
Yeah, and your clan. All this is pick stealth, bleed, and block, because if you start to go into a La Sombra deck, say you did that, and then all of a sudden you see a dementation bleed modifier. Pick it, because you will find some guy that has the dementation that will fit your crypt, because most crypts in draft are so small, 7 or 8 cards, so you can if you have 2 copies of 2 vampires and each of them have dementation in your crypt, you can more or less rely on every single game having a vampire that can bleed dementation, so that one vampire can play that one card, it's worth it.
Okay.
So go for the small combos. And why I picked Stealth, Speed, and Block is because those are the good cards.
Yeah, because you see a lot of people playing like permanent weapons and trying that kind of play in draft. What do you think about that, Isak?
More or less, I think it's too inefficient. Because, okay, you have a lot of... Maybe you have some permanent weapons, and in the long round you will beat someone to torpor. And that's will probably end up being very true in a duel.
And
But
usually, I would just like to point out, usually you see stakes being played in drafts and put in fucking torpor with, which is awesome. Go on.
yeah. But you end up being too inefficient. Like, if you have a rush deck in constructed and you rush and torporize in one turn someone, sometimes that's not efficient enough. And weapons cost pool. So when you buy your third weapon, that's probably what could have been your fourth minion instead. And having a fourth vampire is better than having like 3 meat cleavers.
Well, all this comes down to how combat is actually more card heavy than other strategies. So to make like a comparably and equally good combat deck, it costs a lot more cards, and you have to draft like a hero to get a good combat deck in draft.
Okay, so your number 2, Adam, is vampires whose specials remove the need for cards and other actions.
Yeah.
Would you like?
I think I need to explain that. Yes.
Yeah.
So there are a few vampires that are really, really good, and I think this is like the biggest part where what Isaac said about researching comes in. Which vampires are the good vampires? And the most like obvious, easiest ones are the ones with plus stealth.
Yeah.
That's like, if you see a vampire with +1 stealth, no matter what you've drafted before, consider drafting that vampire. Because they are really, really good. And there are a few other ones that fall under this category as well, and that's like Magozata and Marianne Blair.
Yeah.
They have bloat specials, and
which is ridiculous in draft.
Yeah. Bloat specials will translate to more vampires, and more vampires will translate just to win.
Yeah, more blocks and more bleeds.
Yeah. So, realize which vampires have the strong specials. Zelios special is not so good. Just have that in mind. And
who's Celius? What?
He's the one who can pay cost of locations with his blood, I think.
Yeah.
So that's not so good, but there are a few vampires that are actually really, really powerful. The other one that comes to mind is like one of my favorites. What's her name? Milda Galbraith, who can tap Sabbath vampires during your Anta phase. That's really powerful as well.
Yeah. Before we go on, do you usually like try to pick good cards even if you don't even need them for the deck? But okay, this is a bleed card that I'm not going to be able to use, but I don't want anyone else to have it. Or are you trying? Are you thinking like that when you're drafting, Isak?
I've never so far drafted anything that's unable to bleed, so I usually can use the bleed card. But sure, if there's nothing that is better, why not pick the bleed card? Because that's one less for the guy on your left. But most of the cases, or a lot of cases anyways, you will end up in a situation where you don't care about the guy to your left during the draft pod, what he or she does. At least when I play draft, the draft pod and the first table is not the same.
Okay.
In at least one time I've been in a situation where the first draft pod also were the first table, and that's an organizational issue, but I do think it's an issue, because that makes you can never ever send bleed to your right, so you should always, I think, separate draft pods from first table.
Okay. Adam, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, I think it's just what Isaac. I think Isaac already said it. It's like a priority thing. You're gonna choose cards that are good for you first, and if you're happy with like you don't need any cards from your booster, you're gonna take the cards that are good for other people because they can't get it.
So you see a flamethrower and like, yeah, I don't want to see that one anywhere, so I'm gonna take it.
And it's kind of neat to have a flamethrower in your deck as well. It's like one of those permanents that can actually win you a game just from equipping it.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Most of the cases, the stuff that you don't want the other players to have is the stuff that you want yourself.
Okay.
So it all basically comes down to I want this. Sometimes you figure out what the guy on your left play for what clan that player plays. And if you're in a situation about, okay, I can give this guy his kingdom, or I can just keep it. then you're at the end of the drafting. Then you are at the 6th booster or 7th booster or something like that, until you're figured out. But if you figure it out, and you figure out, oh, that guy plays Gangrel, and here's the eco-terrorists, better keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Okay, so let's go to the last points of the list. Number 3, Adam. Offensive over defensive. Meta dependent.
Yeah. So yeah, this is kind of the reasoning is meta dependent, but this meta I have seen in every single place I've been drafting, and that's that it's extremely common for people to pick defensive cards, wakes, intercepts, well, Raven Spies, like defensive permanents, combat permanents.
Yeah.
And just by how we're playing with the time limit, if you're playing an offensive deck and you try to kill a defensive deck, you might win, you might not win.
Yeah.
But if you're playing an offensive deck and the other players are playing offensive decks as well, it's the same thing there. You might win. You might be able to be more offensive than them and win because of it. But if you're playing a defensive deck and they are playing a defensive deck,
we should have some
a pie chart,
visuals about this. Yeah,
okay.
A pie chart. Yeah, but go on.
Okay, I haven't. Sorry, but yeah, it's kind of easy. If you're playing a defensive deck and they're playing defensive decks, you both try to be defensive, and you try to be more defensive than they are, and like have a more defensive deck. You're just gonna time out.
Yeah.
So, in some situations, a defensive deck might win your game, but there are some situations where a defensive deck can never win. And this is really, really pronounced in draft, because it's so hard to oust just by standard. It's drafting times out more than constructed, in my experience.
Yeah.
So in draft, it's even more important to be offensive to be able to get points, or at all. That's just like, but it's, as I said, it's meta dependent. You might be playing in a meta where a balanced deck is more useful, but almost everywhere I've gone, it's impossible to get victory points without being extremely offensive. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. That's neat. That's a good reasoning there, Adam.
Thank you.
I would say. So number 3 on your list, Isaac, is try to figure out what the ones beside you are going for and use that to your advantage. You were in on this before when you talked about the kingdom.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add?
No, that's basically it. This is talking about the draft pod thing.
Yeah.
And this takes a lot of experience, but with experience you will notice, at least if you draft set that you usually see, and for me that's 3rd edition. That's like the basic draft set, and in those sets and I might be correct there, but I think it's true, at least for uncommons, that they're always the same uncommon pair. I'll say, for instance, I think helicopter and direct intervention is always together.
Yeah.
Now these are generic cards, so it's a bad example because of that. But if you start seeing these patterns, like, oh, these 5 commons and this one is picked, and that's that discipline, and maybe it's a combat card. Okay, so you go for something combat-ish, and it was protein. So then you start down, and then in the end you can calculate. Okay, so no eco-terrorists for you.
Yeah. But that's hard though.
Yeah, but it's more thing you can start notice if you're the guys besides you are prone to go for stealth or intercept.
Yeah.
Those are usually the two that people tend to go for one of those two over-representatively. And you can start... So if you're in a situation, you can choose between one intercept cards or one stealth card. Depending on the future, so I really need intercept, but it's very unlikely that I get another opportunity to pick a intercept card, because the guy to my left is intercept.
A hogger.
Yeah,
hogging all the
hogger.
intercept. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so you have picked your deck and you've done the right thing and taken some stealth and wakes and a lot of offensive cards. Are there anything you should think about when you're actually playing the draft, Adam?
I actually had a revelation once about the draft. I can share it with you.
Oh my god.
Because of how draft decks are kind of random, people won't have full control over how their decks are gonna be. It's impossible to make a read that's accurate about your opponent. If you just see a vampire, you're not gonna know what he's playing, because he might not have had option to get the cards you want.
So far, I think everyone in the world has had this revelation.
Yeah, but that makes it really hard to make long-term strategies. You can't think, okay, I'm gonna give my prey a VP because my Grand Prey is impossible for me to oust, and my Predator, I will be able to backoust him because he plays the deck like this. You can't do a VP strategy long-term. That kind of play doesn't work in draft. That was my revelation. So you need to take every single action separately, and how I'm gonna take this action, how I'm gonna be efficient now, and how I'm gonna be efficient this turn. It's giving away victory points because you think you know what's going on. It's probably not gonna work out. So be more in the now and less strategy.
Have this revelation helped you in your draft game?
Actually, yes. That was I think the turning point for me. I was actually really, really bad at draft before I realized that. I tried to make predictions all the time and it just didn't work. So now I'm decent. I used to be really bad at drafting.
Okay. Isak, do you have any draft tips for the play?
Yeah, I can just add something to what Adam said. This is less true when you come to the draft finals, because then you can start making predictions on people's play, because you probably know what kind of deck they're playing.
Yeah.
So you should keep that in mind. So as the farther the draft tournament goes, the more predictions you can make about other people.
Yeah.
And usually, when you end up playing a draft, people are not as competitive as when playing constructed, so you probably know what everybody plays because people will just say it. So I had this really cool thing. I managed to get 2 Renegade Garus.
Yeah,
stuff like that.
Sire Cinder's Finger and Leather Jacket.
Yeah. Which should be banned. This is for you, Pascal.
Remove the draft effect. Remove the draft effect.
Okay, so I think that's anything more?
No, sorry.
No. So I think that's kind of our show tonight. Before we sign off, I would like to ask you guys: are you for or against shuffling of the deck when you're in the draft? What's it called, mulligan or something?
Mulligan? Well, you mean you get to reshuffle your deck?
Yeah, your library.
On your hand?
No, I'm not talking about mulligan. I've forgotten the word. In drafts.
Recursion.
Yeah, recursion. Yeah, sorry. So, for or against recursion in draft, Isak? Yes or no?
Against recursion.
Adam?
Actually, yeah, against as well.
Yeah, I'm for it. So, fuck you guys.
Okay.
My
nice.
Sorry, that was harsh. I'm going to take up something. Talk for 1 minute.
Okay. The reason I don't like recursion is because if someone gets lucky and manages to draft 2 Contagious Boons, it's not very lucky, but if you manage to draft 2 Contagious Boons, with recursion you're gonna have 4, and that's like a big jump up from just drafting 1 or 0 Contagious Boon to go from. It just obviously it doubles the amount you have of every card. So the randomness that exists in draft is a bit more pronounced with recursion, I feel.
Yeah, it makes sense. So if someone have a slightly better deck before or without recursion, then you get to be even more slightly advantageous if you have recursion before, because everything is doubled. And I can see here in chat that Strala says even in Duffin drafts. Of course not in Duffin drafts. You have to have recursion Duffin drafts.
I think that was a response to the other person before that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Never
okay,
mind.
sorry. Never mind.
Okay.
But if you play really bad editions, you play really bad editions. So if you play, say, Bloodlines and Legacies of Blood, if you combine those two, then you will end up with so craptastic draft decks that you actually need to have recursion to be able to make the draft worth your while.
That's a good point, actually.
I think I like recursion because I rely more on my luck as a drafter than my skill as a player. Yeah, well, okay.
That's honorable of you.
See you at the blackjack table.
So that's it for this time. Thanks everyone for watching, and remember, if you have any thoughts, comments, or ideas, you can post them on our Facebook page or send an email to the address below, which is causeampersandeffect@gmail.com. After the show, we'll post a thread on the weekend.net forum where you can continue the discussion if you want to. So yeah, that's it. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you sometime soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.